Sounds like a plan.
Hi, Roz.
Hi,
Another
Carmen.
session, right?
Yes, another one. Here we go.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about diversity teaching and learning in the US and in Spain.
Okay.
So, what's the agenda for today?
Today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is diversity? How does it affect teaching? How does it affect learning? Who needs to be involved? Diversity itself in the US, what that looks like pertaining in through our educational system, diversity in Spain, and to provide some resources so teachers can have some go-tos for including diversity in their classrooms.
Great. Well, thank you, Roz. Let's get going.
All right, so first we got to kind of define what is diversity. So diversity is everything that makes people different from each other: race, ethnicity,
Oh, sorry.
Gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, ability, age, religious belief, or political conviction. So all of these things kind of create a conundrum of what is diversity. How does it affect teaching? This is where we're going to really be exploring in this podcast today. So teaching to engage diversity will include all learners and to seek equity. It refers to acknowledging a range of differences in the classroom. It signifies embracing those differences. It also allows the differences to transform the way we think, teach, learn, act. So all experiences and ways of being are handled with fairness and justice. So here's where that social justice comes in. And we really have to incorporate that. We're making sure that we're including everybody. No one's left out. So that's why in the last few years in the educational system here in the US, there's been a push for inclusion, 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 inclusion. And that has a lot to do with this, including all our diversity, including all the essence that makes us who we are, and building a diverse, cultural rich classroom.
It's so easy. When you say it like that, it sounds like easy. Okay, so it depends on who we have here, and we're going to cater for each and every one of them. But then at the same time, it's very difficult because we're not talking just about cultural diversity. It's like learning difficulties. It's how your background influences how you develop yourself in the classroom, your knowledge. It's everything that a student brings to the classroom. So that is not easy.
It's not easy. And here's like an example, if some people are still confused. An example of that is when we talk about literacy in the classroom. For example, if a certain culture has a different approach to literacy, everybody thinks literacy means opening a book and reading, right? That's how it's technically defined. However, literacy can be oral in some cultures, like they tell stories orally. So if someone comes to the classroom and they're coming from a culture where all the stories were passed along orally and they've been told stories a lot, they're going to approach learning literacy skills differently. And a lot of times teachers go, oh, well, they're struggling with literacy. No, it's not been open the book, read the book for them. It's been sitting down and grandpa telling that story or grandma telling that story, and it's been passed on from generation to generation. So that is also what we're talking about when we're referring to that diversity in the classroom too, because the way we approach teaching literacy skills would be different for a student who has coming from an oral background of literacy.
That's a great example, Ross. And many times when you're at university and when you're training as a teacher, this sort of thing is not taught to you, because when we see the Spanish part, I don't know if it's the same in the USA, but when we see how things are developing in Spain and in Europe in general, it's always been about the concepts, the knowledge, the how you teach. But this, who you are teaching and why you're teaching them and how you can teach them, how you can reach them better, and making each student feel that you're catering for his or her needs, that is very difficult. And that hasn't been done before.
No, it hasn't. And a lot of times teachers struggle with this. They
Yes,
struggle with this. And that's been a lot of
definitely.
push in a lot of teacher educational programs now to include that diversity aspect. And when we're teaching literacy skills, how to teach literacy skills, we having now to incorporate that, how there are going to be cultural, different, diverse ways to approach literacy.
Really?
So yes, there are three essential imperatives to kind of actively participate or practice teaching for diversity, inclusion, and equity. And they could be defined as these following three. Difference is an essential part of our history and current reality. So acknowledging the fact that the way we did things in the past is not necessarily the way we do things now or how we would do in the future, because we know things are always changing and we're having to adapt to those changes. Difference is an unstoppable part of our future. So there are going to be differences. It's always going to be difference. It's our classroom. We've already know research has told us by the year 2050 is going to look so diverse and so different than it did maybe 50 or 60 years ago. And we have to make sure that we include those demographics into our lesson planning, into our instruction, in the way that we present ourselves as educators in the classroom. And the third would be diversity and inclusion. Improve teaching and learning. Here is where we're talking about that whole inclusive classroom. It's no longer homogeneous classrooms, they're heterogeneous classrooms. Also, that we are incorporating even our special education students now have to be in the classroom for a certain amount of time, unless their IEP, which is here we in the States with their individual education plan, requires them to have one-on-one instruction for a certain amount of time of the day, and then they must have inclusion for another part of the day. So this is a understanding that. And again, when we start to think about that as one teacher in the classroom, with now the classroom can have 25 to 30 plus students, it proposes some challenges to keep up with all that. But in this discussion, we'll kind of give you some resources to how we could kind of make it easier and making sure that we are including diversity, inclusion, and equity in the classroom.
Okay.
Now, how does it affect learning? So here we have to think about what we're called the chronic achievement gap. Here in the United States, we've been, since No Child Left Behind Act in the Bush administration, we've been talking about the achievement gap amongst non-Caucasian students and our minority students, trying to close that achievement gap in our educational system. So it's basically created an epidemic of dependent learners unprepared to do higher order thinking. So creative problem solving, analytical reading and writing. So now you will see these curriculum changes to actually include critical thinking skills and allowing our students to critically think, problem solve, and using a lot of different strategies like problem-based learning or project-based learning in order to create lifelong learners and not learners that are just regurgitating the information during an examination time. Underdeserved students.
That's the way it's been here in Spain as well.
Yes.
You memorized everything, and then, like you said, you just regurgitate it in an exam. And I was flabbergasted when in one of my classes, you know, that my level, well, my teaching context is very different to yours. In my teaching context, I have a mix people from different backgrounds, from like 16-year-olds to retirees. So that means that many times I have even teachers in my classroom, teachers that are in-service teachers. And I was flabbergasted when one of them told me that they had never thought of critical thinking. We were doing a critical thinking activity in which you were supposed to learn what critical thinking was and then develop that critical thinking. And I was flabbergasted when they told me that they had never thought of, like critical thinking. I've never learned that. And how am I supposed to teach that to my students? I mean, like, really? This is the 21st century. We're talking about developing digital skills, and that all of the teachers at the end of this 2022-2023 year, academic year, everybody, all of the teachers, they're aiming for, the Spanish government and the Ministry of Education is aiming for their teachers to have an A1 level of computer literacy. How
Mhm.
can you be striving for that when your teachers are lacking critical thinking skills? And they
Exactly.
haven't even questioned themselves with regards to critical thinking.
Exactly. So this is something that I guess it seems like it's not just an issue in the United States. It seems like it's an issue in Spain as well. And probably some other places, we never know. But again, it has created a problem. So now you would see a lot of teacher education programs. For example, in our teacher education program at Tennessee State University, this is one key component that we're making sure that we incorporate in not just one particular teacher education course, but all of them, that we're making sure that they understand the necessity for closing the achievement gap, especially for underdeserved students like English language learners, poor students, or students of color. Also making sure that we have, they understand the importance of having different problems solving skills incorporated in lessons, analytical, and what that looks like. We can give them all the theory, but we also need to also give them the praxis. So you've seen that shift a lot in education, teacher education programs here in the United States. It's no longer, okay, just spit the theory out. Now, okay, here we go. We're going to actually show you how to put this into practice. And then we're going to give you more and more opportunities to do that in the field through practicum experiences and teacher student teaching experiences and things like that, and internships and so forth. And the name of this struggle is called the productive struggle, which is growing brain power. They've named it, they've given it a name, and they said that it's considered to be called the productive struggle, that we are struggling with incorporating growing brain power. And in order to be culturally responsive and including all of that and making sure that we're serving our underdeserved students and that we're actually closing that chronic achievement gap, we have to understand that we are including growing brain power skills in every lesson. So here it kind of talks about how we are trying to shift from dependent learners into independent learners. So another way to think about it is from that regurgitating learner to those lifelong learners, which is the independent learner. So here on the side that we see the shift that we've been changing. We used to rely heavily on the teacher. Now we're more self-reliant. We see more student-centered classrooms than teacher-centered classrooms. Cannot make decisions about their own learning. Now we promote more learner autonomy and can make informed decisions about their learning. So we promote more learner autonomy in the classrooms. They do not know their strengths and weaknesses. We do not do that anymore. That's why we use a lot of portfolios. We're making students more aware of where their strengths and weaknesses are, where they have to work on, and things they may not know. So we do a lot of collaborative learning, and this is where it is. It's like, hey, if we're going to work on this project, I know I'm really good at this. Let me do this. You do this, and we feed off of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Another thing is we're shifting from do not connect classroom learning with the real world. Now we are about real life authentic learning. So what you learn in this classroom, you should be able to apply in real life situations, and we're bringing real life situations into the classroom. So here we're using more problem-based learning, project-based learning, things that have that real world connection. So that's where it makes sense. A lot of times you sit there and go, why in the world did I learn geometry? What in the world was geometry and calculus for? However, if we were able to connect that to some real life situation, then that makes more sense to the student, and they'll be more engaged in wanting to learn that aspect. Also, think that the teacher is responsible for the learning and take responsibility of their own learning. So here again, promoting that thank that teacher is responsible. I believe that was supposed to be think the teacher is responsible. Yeah, I think that was a mistake. I'm sorry. Think that the teacher is responsible for their learning. which is not the case. Everybody thought it was a teacher's job. Take responsibility for their own learning, meaning that learner autonomy. I am the learner. I should ask questions. I should know, if I don't get something, it's not the teacher's sole responsibility all the time. They're not saying the teacher doesn't have responsibilities, they do, but it's not their sole responsibility all the time. You should be able to advocate for yourself. So giving students a voice. And do not know the best ways to learn something, know about the use of different tools and strategies for learning. So here's where our instructional strategies come in. The UDL framework comes in, Universal Design for Learning, breaking down those barriers to learning. All those different things come into play now in the classroom because we know we have diverse learners in the classroom, and we can use those diversities in order to make a very enriched learning experience.
Definitely. I mean, I'm thinking of like my own classroom, the age difference, for instance, the other day we were talking about social media and the impact of social media in our lives. And because I have teachers in the classroom and I have high school students in the classroom, well, it was interesting to see like the two opposites, like how a parent is dealing with all of this insecurity with regards to social media and how their children interact with social media. Well, at the same time, we have an actual high school student there, like we have a teenager there that is expressing like his or her point of view and saying, listen, it's not that bad. I mean, you're trying to prohibit something that is it's like in the past you were trying to ban smoking. You weren't supposed to smoke because smoking was bad for you, and yet many adults smoked. It's like now many adults are continuously looking at their cell phones while at the same time they're telling their children they have a cell phone, but they're telling the children that they shouldn't be using the cell phone. I mean, how can you tell your son or your daughter not to use the cell phone and not to be on the cell phone for however many hours a day when you're constantly checking your messages and sending messages to other people and so forth? I mean,
it's a double-edged sword.
But what happened to that? Like teaching by example. I mean, I'm the principal of a school. If I don't set a role model, how can I call anybody, any of my teachers, on what they're doing theoretically not doing correctly, if you know what?
I understand. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Let's move on then, shall we? Oops. Or not. Yeah, here we go.
There we go. All right, so here is a good resource. This book here that's called Culture Responsive Teaching in the Brain really aligns with what I was speaking with in the previous slides. It's talking about that achievement gap, that chronic epidemic of the achievement gap that has created those dependent learners, and making that shift into independent learners and closing the achievement gap and being more of a culturally responsive teacher. So knowing that I have a diverse classroom, how am I going to use those different diversities in my classroom to enhance the learning experience for all students? So this is one of my recommendations, a really good read, and it's has within itself a lot of different resources as well. So check out this book. Okay. And I think and actually a lot of school districts here in the United States have adopted this as part of their reading, book club reading, and kind of enforcing some of these things to their teachers to be more culturally responsive, knowing that they have such a unique and diverse classroom setting.
Thank you very much. We'll bear it in mind. Okay. Yeah. So,
and next is, who needs to be involved? And it's a community effort. It's not just the teacher in the classroom. It's everyone. It's Congress. It's the laws that need and rules, and it's curriculum developing. It's the school districts. It's the teachers. It's the families. It is a village. That saying where it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to teach a child. And it's a lot of times that mind shift has been a struggle here in the United States. It's still an ongoing struggle to shift that mind where it's not just the teacher's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility to get involved. That's why a lot of schools now have a lot of parent engagement and parent involvement and community involvement and a lot of laws, and we have a lot of resource officers that are seen in our school buildings or around our communities, helping out our students in any way that they can, pushing for legislation for change when it comes to curriculum or educational experiences. So it is a village teaching our children. So it's not just teacher involvement, it's community involvement. It's our village. It really is our village to
I
teach.
agree 100%. It's not just the teachers in the classroom. I mean, many times in the past, and I suppose in the future, it will continue happening. It's like I take my son or my daughter to school and the school takes charge. No, it's not just that. It's like everything. It's
Mhm.
from, we've seen so many examples of like the police that is supposed to be on our side and defend us, and they make mistakes, and they probably didn't have the diversity training that they should have had. And so they have so many stereotypes that have been, like handed down over the years. And there are so many mistakes that perhaps if we had had a different type of education could not have happened. Sad mistakes.
Sad mistakes, and you're right. I mean, it's not to say it still isn't occurring. It is still occurring,
Right.
but we're pushing for a change because we know, like we said, it's changing. We need to change with the times. We need to evolve with the times. It's not just, everything around us is evolving and not the classroom. No, the classroom is going to have to evolve, and that has to also include all of these individuals that we see here on the screen.
Yeah.
So it's a process, and we know it takes time, but in the fact that hopefully that it is moving along slowly but surely, we'll eventually hopefully get there. So
I
Carmen, now tell us about diversity in Spain. How is that
Wow.
look?
Well, I don't know if whether to say it looks or it doesn't look, or we're on the road to. Okay, so one of the articles that I used to prepare this section was Inclusive Education and Attention to Diversity, an unsolved, and this title kind of summarizes it all, an unsolved subject in the teacher training curriculum in Spain. Okay, so these three authors, Sanchez Serrano, Alba Pastor, and Zubiga del Rio, they have written a wonderful article that was published in January, like months ago, not even a year ago, in Spain, and that kind of summarizes everything that has been happening. Okay, there's been a big curriculum shift, if you like, because at the end of 2020, the organic law that we call LOMLOE was approved, and it's 14 years um, after the 2006 law. I mean, the way that society is changing nowadays with technology, globalization, what happened with the pandemic, and so many other issues, this reform of the teaching profession is too slow. Okay, so what they started doing was going to the university and reviewing the training programs and how this affects teachers. And they realized that the training programs were obsolete, that they were still thinking in the past, and there were so many issues that were not being taken into consideration. Some of them, for instance, how to enforce discipline and classroom management, the whole topic of digital skills. I mean, I still to this day, we know, because I've mentioned it so many times, that I'm the new principal of a school.
Mhm.
And when teachers come to me and they tell me that they don't want to teach an online course because they don't have any digital or online training, I still, like I was in the United States in 2001 when the towers fell. And that was the very first time. I mean, this is 21 years ago, Ross.
Mhm.
I'm turning 64 in like a week. And I'm 64 and I'm aware of I'm still teaching and I'm still in management and I'm still in leadership. And I'm
Mhm.
aware of how important being aware of the your context, your teaching context, and how important digital skills and technology is nowadays. I mean, how can you as a teacher, as a novel teacher that has just taken a position, in our case as a tenured teacher, how can you not be aware of that? How can you not think that technology and incorporating digital skills into your teaching methods is not important? How can you not think of that? How can you not think that technology nowadays is important? I mean, that goes hand in hand with universal design for learning. It goes hand in hand with attention to diversity. It has to do with the gender perspective, because the more you read, the more you're online, the more you sift through content, the more you realize that there's a whole world out there that you need to know about. Because believe it or not, what you bring to your classroom is what you know. And if you don't know about diversity, if you don't know about gender, if you don't know about so many issues that are going on nowadays, that is a deficiency that you're bringing to your classroom. And that makes me really, really sad. So,
Well,
anyhow,
no,
sorry,
well, I
go ahead.
mean, I completely understand what you're saying. And it's like people are, in general, change could be intimidating, Carmen. A lot of times, and when you get set in your ways in that classroom and you have a routine, you have a way of doing things, changing changing it up could be a bit of, an intimidating process. So
Yeah.
getting individuals to understand that, yeah, you have teachers who've been in the field for over 20 plus years, and
Yeah.
they haven't quite made, some of them haven't quite made that connection that, I may have those years of experience, but yet sometimes, we have to shift with it. Some teachers do. I'm not saying that they don't, but I'm saying, the ones that don't, it's, that's where you see the apprehensiveness towards the change, and not, and like what you're speaking of, wait a minute, you're not understanding critical thinking skills are imperative, that shift changed, um, it takes a little bit to do. It takes a little bit to do, like you said.
But it's sad because we're educators. I mean, we're the people that are forging the minds of the future and the future in general. I mean, if you have a fixed mindset and you are in your fixed mindset and you cannot break the chains that are keeping you in that fixed mindset, and you cannot see the benefits of a growth mindset, Roz, what are we doing with the future of our the future? Full stop.
Those are the hard
Our
questions
children,
that
for our grandchildren, for our great grandchildren.
But those are the hard questions and discussions that have to be held with the principal and those individual teachers,
Yeah.
at that time, and those that it could be difficult and challenging, So I hate to say it, it's like, when you reach a point, if you're not willing to change with the times, maybe it's time for you to say, maybe I need to step down. Those are difficult
And
things
move
to
on to a
say.
different profession, definitely. Because
Yeah,
the
I
teaching
guess.
profession, I think, is not, now that I'm like a few years away from retirement, I look back and I think I've touched so many lives and I've influenced so many lives. Because, well, we know as teachers that sooner or later your path crosses with one or more of your students, and they tell you, like, you were somebody important in my life. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have done this, that, or the other. Or if it hadn't been for you, I would have thought of this, or I would have thought, like, you were somebody that was important in me choosing my career or changing my career. you know, that is something that is very gratifying for a teacher.
Well, yes, it is gratifying. And, that's what I think keeps us going. But again, that can open up a whole new can of worms about here, like in the United States, where we're experiencing a teacher shortage nationwide. And I think a lot of it, like we mentioned before, has to do with the devaluation that society has put on the profession
Yeah.
and
I
not
agree with you
realizing,
100%, but that's international. That is not just in the United States. It's not
which
just
is
in Spain.
interesting that
I
you
think it's
say
in
that,
Europe
because
and the rest of the world.
hey, well, wow, that's good. I'm glad that you kind of brought that out, because we're seeing it a lot in our teacher education programs, that we're struggling with retention and recruitment, in our profession. But I think that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother podcast. So
Yeah, definitely. And that
definitely,
brings
I
me
think that.
to another point, which is that teachers admit that they're not feeling prepared. They're not feeling prepared in so many different areas, and they're
Mhm.
feeling challenged. They're feeling that the teaching profession is daunting. It's not just attention to diversity. It's, there's been a systemic lack of interest in the teacher training curriculum. And maybe in 2006 or so is when they started mm, to think about incorporating like inclusive education, and it was actually recognized as a right because there was a committee that was formed, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in 2006. That's not that long ago, Ross. I mean,
Mhm.
teachers should have been aware of what was going on a long time before that. And I know that the history of Spain has been difficult. It has been complex, and just reaching democracy was a struggle and a challenge. But we put so much effort into mm, militarization and so many other subjects that we're not going to go into because, like you said, that opens another can of worms and another podcast.
Oh yeah, that
Okay, so
definitely does,
future
because
teachers today in Spain, okay, take one compulsory subject on diversity, which is 6 credits of the whole 240 credits that they need in order to become a teacher. I mean, that is nothing. And it's not even, it's a compulsory subject, but you have so
Mhm.
many other subjects. Like, how many teachers actually take that because they have to take it and aren't really interested in? And I've included this map of Spain because you can see that Spain is divided into different autonomous regions. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, there isn't, I mean, laws come out in Madrid, which is where the Ministry of Education is located. But then each of the autonomous regions adapts that law to its own context. So that means that there are going to be autonomous regions that are going to put more emphasis on this diversity and the development of diversity. And there are going to be other autonomous regions that are either going to ignore it because there are other issues that are more pressing. And so this means that there's an uneven panorama in Spain. Okay, so
Mhm.
basically, it's not just up to the individual autonomous region, it's up to like the individual school and how they cope with their diversity in their context, which makes it really sad because you don't really have the resources to fall back on to say, okay, I have like this X, Y, or Z problem in my school, and I can go to this person or this association or to help me because I don't have the resources, I don't have the knowledge, but I have backup
Mhm.
that is going to help me. Well, that more often than not does not happen. There is none.
And it's interesting that you said that, because again, we are a lot of universities, in order to maintain their accreditation here in the US, especially the teacher education programs, now they're looking for how many courses are we including diversity in. And one of the goals of, you know, most teacher education programs is to make sure that diversity is included in all the courses that are meant, you know, that have to be taken in the teacher education program. And that some of that is making sure that we maintain that. And that is part of one of the accreditation requirements now, that they have to see this diversity and inclusion included or incorporated somehow in every single course that we have in the teacher education program, even when you're talking about foundations of education.
Well, I included this slide because I'm really lucky to be living in the south of Spain, in the province of Malaga, and they had like a provincial, like for the whole province, there were about 200 teachers there, and teachers of primary and secondary, and I think I was the only teacher of my level that was there, the only principal, as a matter of fact, that was there, and they were like a full day workshop and professional development that was focused specifically on diversity. And there was everything there, from gender inclusion to UDL to neuroscience to emotional intelligence. It was amazing. It was everybody there with a common goal, admitting that we didn't know what we should know in order to be able to help our students in the 21st century, because there are so many cases that it's not just about having a class where there are different nationalities. It's about having a class where there are different sexual orientations, and how you can offend somebody, how you can affect somebody, and the way that they see the world in the future, just because you don't address them like you should be addressing them. It's not just about man and woman anymore. It's
Using the correct pronouns, he,
yeah.
she. Yeah, and that's true. And making sure that we have incorporated that not only in, you know, society, but also into the classrooms as well.
Yeah, and into the families being aware and accepting
Mm.
what is happening within their family. It's one of the things that just occurred to me is that we're opening up so much with social media, and we're seeing so many situations and cultures and countries and so forth, that it's a real eye opener, if you want it to be an eye opener within your family and the way that you educate your children in the
Mhm.
21st century and for the 21st century. Okay, so it's not just Spain. Spain is part of the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe is striving not just for a policy within like a language policy, but also in society and an economic policy and so forth. So we're part of the system, fortunately, and also an international system as well, because fortunately diversity is one of the within education, one of the issues that is a present issue, and that we know that is a challenge for the future. So resources. Having said what we've said, I've tried to get together a few links to resources that might help teachers. And if somebody has doubts with regards to what diversity is and how to cope with diversity, there are resources, there's reading materials, and there are different perspectives from the different countries as well. I've included not only the US, I've also included Canada and Europe. And I'm pretty sure that if we had a look at the Middle East, I haven't included the Middle East, but I'm pretty sure that if we had to look at the Middle East, there are also countries that, I think that it's a worldwide issue. It's globalization is not only negative in the sense that we all catch COVID, it's also looking at the positive side of things. It's we're sharing challenges, we're sharing issues, we're sharing, ways of solving those problems.
It's not just like you said, it's just not one person's issue, it's everyone's issue, and we just need to all get on board, like you said. And like you said, it takes a village.
Yeah. And
So
it
it's
makes
gonna
my
take,
heart smile when I see people like Greta Thunberg,
yeah,
like she's out there, she's the future, and she's convincing others. It's something that is contagious. So I'm
yes,
hopeful for my grandchildren and my great grandchildren.
exactly. So that brings us to a close of this podcast, but don't
Exactly.
miss our next session, which will be in January. Don't miss out on our teacher self-care and things, how important that is for teacher self-care. And we'll have a lot of pointers and things that we can do as educators to make sure that we do not burn out, which
Oh
is
yeah,
something
that
that
is
can
so
happen very
so
quickly.
important.
Yes,
Yeah, because we're always talking about the student, and how to help the student. And there isn't all that much out there on how to help the teacher
how to
and
help the
how
teacher.
to
Yeah,
keep a teacher, mm, so you deal with all of these issues every day in your classroom, and we need to help you too.
yep. Rejuvenate, keep it
Yep.
going.
Okay.
All
So,
right. So if you like to continue to hear sessions like this on our podcast, please support the cause by going to bonfire.com and looking up our campaign called Education Matters. And if you, a lot of merch there that you can support the cause. If you use the code first time 23, you get 25% off any of the merch that are there. So I will link the link in the description box when we post this YouTube
okay. Well,
podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Ross. And I guess we'll wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New
Happy
Year.
holidays,
So
Happy
see
New
you
Year.
next year,
Yeah,
2022.
and we'll see.
Let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that it's a fabulous year that addresses all of these challenges and that starts solving problems. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ross.
See you next time.
See you
Bye.
again soon. Bye.